Some cars make history by being loud, others by being unforgettable. But then there's the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, a car that didn't shout, didn't chase attention, didn't lead any horsepower wars, yet somehow it became the one America couldn't stop buying. You look at it today and you don't see a headline car. You don't see a burnout machine or a movie star. You see a simple shape, clean lines, calm confidence. And maybe that's the mystery right there. How did a car this quiet end up defining an entire decade of American roads? Because the truth is simple. While other cars were fighting for the spotlight, the Cutlass Supreme was quietly filling driveways, one family at a time. No noise, no drama, just presence. Just the kind of reliability people trusted when the world around them felt unsteady. And it didn't rise because of a single invention or some dramatic moment. Its success came from something much smaller and much more honest. It was the car that felt right for its time. The car that fit the people who drove it. But to understand how it took over America, you have to step back into an era when everything was changing. The roads, the fuel, the economy, and the dreams of the people behind the wheel. That's where this story really begins. Because behind the calm face of the Cutlass Supreme is a rise nobody expected and a legacy most people have forgotten. But not the ones who grew up seeing it in the driveway every morning. Not the ones who remember long trips, warm seats, and a car that never pretended to be more than it was. This is the story of the car that didn't try to be a legend, but became one anyway. Quietly, gently, and completely. Now let's step into the world that made it possible. The early 1970s were not easy years for the American car world. For more than a decade, power had been the language of success. Big engines, bright colors, loud badges that promised speed. But by 1973, the mood had shifted. Families were worried about fuel, insurance costs were rising, emissions laws were tightening, and the country was quietly preparing for a new kind of road ahead. Oldsmobile saw the change earlier than most. They understood something simple but important. People still wanted a car that felt special. They just didn't want the noise and trouble that came with the muscle era. That's where the Cutlass Supreme stepped forward. Not as a performance hero, not as a luxury car, but as a calm, confident, middle-ground choice that felt safe in a world that wasn't. The 1973 redesign wasn't dramatic or aggressive. It was smooth, clean, and balanced. A long hood, a formal roofline, and a confident stance that felt more grown up than the cars it replaced. It didn't scream for attention. It simply looked right. And that mattered. Because in a decade full of uncertainty, Americans were searching for something steady. A car they could count on for the daily commute. A car that looked respectable in the driveway. A car that offered comfort without the badge of arrogance. The Cutlass Supreme gave them exactly that. Not by chasing trends, but by understanding the people behind the wheel. And as the roads changed, as the car market tightened, as families recalibrated their priorities, the Cutlass Supreme quietly positioned itself to become the car America didn't know it needed, but ended up choosing more than any other. This wasn't just timing. It was Oldsmobile's careful reading of the American heartbeat. And it was the beginning of the moment when this calm, understated car stepped into national dominance. When people talk about American cars of the early 70s, they usually bring up the legends, the big names, the loud ones. But the story of the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme doesn't live in racetracks or posters. It lives in real homes, real families, and the quiet moments that shaped everyday American life. For a lot of working families, owning a Cutlass Supreme wasn't about status. It was about finally stepping into something that felt a little better than the usual. A car that looked sharp without trying too hard. A car that felt comfortable without being expensive. A car that told your neighbors, "We're doing all right," but didn't brag about it. Inside, the Cutlass Supreme had a warmth people didn't forget. Soft seats, the wood-tone trim, the gentle curve of the dash that made the cabin feel wider than it was. Even the door panels had a quiet elegance, something Oldsmobile had always done well. You could picture a family in 1973 sitting inside it for the first time. Maybe the father ran his hand across the steering wheel. Maybe the mother checked the back seat for space. Maybe a kid said nothing at all but felt proud because this didn't look like the older cars parked on the street. It became the promotion car. The car you bought when life was finally becoming steady. A symbol of small success, not big dreams. Something reachable, something real. Dealers loved it because customers trusted it. Mechanics appreciated it because it wasn't complicated or fragile. Owners depended on it because it felt honest. A car built for real driving, not magazine covers. And that's why its story is human at the core. The Cutlass Supreme wasn't designed to be a cultural icon. Its job was simple: to show up every day, to start every morning, to make road trips smoother, and to be the one car in the driveway that felt like it belonged there. People didn't fall in love with it instantly. They grew into it. It became part of their routine, part of the scenery, part of the good years. Some still remember the sound of its doors closing, the calm thump that older cars had, or the long summer drives when the world felt slower. That's where the Cutlass Supreme connected with America, not through speed, not through fame, but through the quiet dignity of a car that fit ordinary life perfectly. And when you look back at the families who chose it, you begin to understand why this car took over the country one driveway at a time. By the early 70s, the old rules of the car market were breaking down. Muscle cars had ruled the previous decade, but their moment was fading fast. Insurance rates climbed, fuel prices worried people, and emissions regulations pushed automakers into a new direction. Most companies scrambled to hold on to the past. Oldsmobile didn't. They adjusted, quietly, confidently. The 1973 Cutlass Supreme arrived with a shape that wasn't about power. It was about balance, smooth lines, a long hood, a formal roofline that gave the car a mature posture. Nothing about it felt rushed. It felt considered. It felt calm. And that calm became its strength. Because in a year when the entire industry seemed uncertain, Americans were looking for a car that didn't feel like a gamble. Something stylish but not loud. Comfortable but not oversized. Affordable but not basic. The Cutlass Supreme stepped right into that space. Sales didn't just improve, they surged. Families who once wanted muscle cars now wanted something they could trust for 10 or 15 years. Companies added them to fleets. Grandparents bought them because they rode smooth. Young adults saved for them because they looked just upscale enough to feel special. And as the market shifted, something unexpected happened. The Cutlass line began climbing toward the top of the sales charts. No big campaign, no aggressive slogan, just steady momentum. By the end of the decade, the Cutlass nameplate had become the best-selling car in America. And 1973 was the year that pushed it onto that path. It didn't win because it was the fastest. It didn't win because it was the boldest. It won because it matched the moment America was living through. A moment when reliability mattered more than noise, when comfort mattered more than horsepower, when people valued a car that simply did its job and did it well. This was the turning point. The quiet rise of a car built for real life, not magazine covers. And in that shift, the Cutlass Supreme found its place in history. Looking back now, it's easy to understand why the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme connected with so many people. It didn't promise excitement. It didn't try to change the world. It simply gave Americans something that felt stable during a time when almost everything else was shifting under their feet. For many owners, it wasn't just a car. It was the vehicle that carried them through job changes, family milestones, long drives, slow evenings, and uncertain times. It represented a kind of steady dignity, the same kind of quiet confidence Oldsmobile had spent decades building. When people talk about it today, they don't remember specs first. They remember how it rode, how the seats felt on long highways, how it carried kids to school and families on holidays. They remember the calmness of the car, the softness of its edges, the predictability of its engine. It didn't dominate with noise. It didn't stand out with flash. It simply became part of the rhythm of American life. A familiar shape in neighborhoods, a dependable presence in millions of driveways. And even now, when collectors chase muscle cars or rare performance models, there's a quiet group of people who still look at a '73 Cutlass Supreme and see something personal, something real. A reminder of a time when cars were built for comfort, for family, and for years of honest service. The legacy of the Cutlass Supreme isn't about being the most powerful or the most desired. Its legacy is about being the one people trusted, and sometimes that's more important than anything else a car can offer. That's the lasting truth of the 1973 Cutlass Supreme. A car that didn't ask for attention, it earned its place quietly, and it stayed there. When the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme first arrived, nobody predicted what it would become. It wasn't the star of any showroom. It wasn't the loud choice. It wasn't the kind of car magazines rushed to put on their covers. But that was never the point. Its strength was quieter than that. It understood the moment America was living in, and it understood the people who were stepping into it every morning. For years, the Cutlass Supreme stayed where it felt most natural. Parked in front of small homes, pulled up to grocery stores, rolling through neighborhoods at a steady pace. It wasn't chasing records, but it ended up setting them anyway. By the end of the decade, no other nameplate in the country outsold it. Not because it was the fastest, not because it was the boldest, but because it met people exactly where they were. Today, clean examples are getting harder to find. Time has thinned the roads, the driveways, and the memories. But when someone sees one, even from a distance, the reaction is the same. A quiet pause, a small smile, a memory rising back up. Because this wasn't a car built to impress history. It was a car built to serve people who needed something steady in their lives. And that's exactly what it did. Its story isn't dramatic, it's human, and that's why it matters. The 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme may not be the first car people mention when they talk about American legends. But for the families who drove it, for the generations who grew up in its back seats, for the workers who depended on it, and for the millions who trusted it without a second thought, it was more than a machine. It was part of their life. And sometimes, the greatest automotive stories are written by the cars that don't try to be remembered. They just are. That's the legacy of the Cutlass Supreme. A legend that didn't need volume to last. Only honesty. Only comfort. Only time.